Alright, let's kick off this month's reviews. Hello everyone, welcome or welcome back to A Fictional Escapist. My name is Chris, and today's video is the Palom and Where Heroes Were Born book reviews. I did mention earlier in my August at a glance video that I am going to have to pop a few of these reviews together and just make two shorter reviews to get them all out due to reading so many indie books in the Indie Accords Readathon. But that is okay, it feels really good to have had a whole month where I just focused solely on indie books, so a big thank you again to Lana for running that readathon. Today we've got Palom by L.L. McCrae. This is book 2 in the World of Lunaria, and Where Heroes Were Born by Tom Dumrell, book 3 in the Pillars of Peace. Now I've put these two together as they are both sequels and part of series, and I can't go into too much depth without going to spoiler territory in terms of plot. So we're going to start off with Palom by L.L. McCrae. I will say that before going into Palom, I had seen some criticisms that this book had slowed right down and had a bit of the middle book syndrome. I have to disagree there. I think that yes, this book does slow down, but I think that's what a good book 2 does, particularly in a longer running series. This is a 6-book planned series, and book 2 slows us down from the fast-paced action and adventure of book 1 and really lets us look at the world and the characters. I think that this is perfect. This is what a book 2 should be doing, in my opinion, is giving us a little bit more depth and letting us know what we're really in for in terms of the bigger overarching plot. Before I go too into detail, there is very little I can tell you about Palom without giving away some spoilers for Marota, as this story takes place directly after the first book and deals with the consequences of that book. So I am going to say I'm going to very, very briefly have a look at the characters rather than the overall plot of the book, but that will still give away some mild spoilers for Marota. I've got my Marota review linked up there if you are interested, but I will also put a timestamp down below for when I go into general thoughts, which will be the non-spoiler part of this book. So if you want no spoilers for Marota, then please just click on to the next little bit. Alright, we're going to spoilers for book 1 in 3, 2, 1. So we started off with Amara. She is our sky pirate, and she has teamed up with the rogue Aurelian from book number 1 named Cole. They are off to Orin to try and uncover some ancient magic to deal with something that happened at the end of book 1 and see if that can be reversed and undone. That is, of course, if they let her in. Any non-Aurelian creature has never before been let into the world of Orin. We then have Sephora, who has claimed his rightful ownership of the throne. This Varcane king does not know how to rule without anything other than fear and violence. And then we have Palom, our namesake of this book. He is lost. He has been deemed a hero, he is being celebrated, and he's very uncomfortable with the fact. He also questions whether the Varcane government are going to be any better to create a peaceful life for the citizens of his world. He very much doubts that, with Sephora at the head of the government. Not really knowing what to do with himself and having fled a few places before for similar reasons, he decides to flee and go back home. Unfortunately for Palom, Sephora doesn't really like having him as a loose end and sets up some things to take him out. Now, we do have a few new plot elements that have been brought to light in book 2, but going into those would again give away too much of book 1. What I will say is that maybe it's not just the Aurelians who are after power and pretty much will do anything to keep it. The World of Lunaria is fast becoming one of my favourite series that I have read this year. L.L. McCrae has shot to an auto by author for me. I now think I have everything that she has released either in ebook copy, or I've just ordered a bunch of physical books as well. The second book in this series really expands on world building and characters, and they're the two things that I'm going to mention here. The world building in book 1 was already fairly impressive. Travelling via skyship, we got to see a lot of areas and visit different areas for different characters. Now in book 2 we are largely travelling via foot, and we get to really expand those worlds as well as deep dive into some of the cultures that we may have touched upon in book 1. Palom is the focus of this book, and he goes back into his hometown, and we really get to see his species and just how broad that species is and what they can do and the different types of shifters that they have. So if you are someone who likes shifters and animals, this book is definitely going to be up your alley. We really do get to see a lot more of that in the second installment. We also get to see new parts of this world that were maybe mentioned very briefly in book 1, and I'm talking about Orin. This is a sky city for the Aurelians, and it was really cool to get quite a deep look into a new area. And as with book 1, there are other areas that are mentioned that we may get to see as the series continues, and that's always exciting to me as a world-driven reader. The second thing I want to mention is the character work here. So we do slow down a little bit and we get deeper dives into characters that were maybe more of side characters in book 1, but now really do come to the front of the light here in book 2. With Palom being the namesake, we really do get a feel for who he is and why his motivations are set in the way that they are. We get to have a look at thought patterns and maybe some past experiences, as well as harsher versus softer sides of these characters, and even new sides to a couple of them in this book. We get introduced to a few new characters. I really liked Isa, who was a side character in book number 1, but sort of came more towards the main plot points in book number 2, and even has her own entry in this series as book 4 in the world of Lunaria. Now, I will also mention we do get an animal companion towards the end of this book. We get a baby dragon who acts more like a bird and a dog than a dragon, and it's just adorable, and I'm really looking forward to see how that friendship develops between the characters and the little baby dragon. I cannot wait to dive into book 3 of this series, and Lauren has said that it is her favourite of this series so far, so that's pretty exciting to me as a reader. That was Palom. Now jumping into Where Heroes Were Born by Tom Dumrell. This is book 3 in the Pillars of Peace series and the conclusion to the trilogy. Bit of a bittersweet moment to say that it is the conclusion of Mr. Dumrell's series, because it was delightful. If you are someone who likes historical fiction or historical fantasy, this is going to be right up your alley. The entire series comes in just under 1,000 pages, and I think Tom Dumrell is currently working on a special collector's edition with all 3 included, and I will be looking out for that for these shelves. Where Heroes Were Born takes place roughly 10 years after the events of No Place for Peace. We are with the same set of characters, but they have settled into new roles and become quite comfortable within these roles. This is very much a historical political fantasy with a focus on character work, and it feels very comforting to go back to this world. What's interesting about Where Heroes Were Born is it takes a creative approach that I haven't really seen done before. In books 1 and 2, we are following Cyrus and his sort of story arc, and now that we're here and we're 10 years after the events of book 2, we switch and we're following Francine, which is Cyrus's sister, that we did get to know a little bit in those first 2 books, but now she is front and center. Francine is the chosen shield to Queen Mathilde. Now, I hope I pronounced that correctly, but she longs for more. She's wanting a sense of adventure, but is also very loyal to the queen that she protects. It comes time for that queen to find a husband and try and produce an heir to the throne. So Francine jumps at the chance to go on an adventure and maybe find a little romance of her own. We also follow a character named Locke. Now, Locke was also a side character in the first 2 books, and he is the second POV in this installment. He was once a prince, he is now a prison master, and he's struggling to find his own identity and his purpose away from his unpleasant father, who basically just rouses on him all the time and is not a good dude. Do not like King What's-His-Face. Locke is tasked with something that will put the political standing of the entire world at risk, and he needs to determine whether he wants to be that guy following in his father's footsteps and doing his father's bidding, or become his own man, and what does that mean to him? Changing up the style of storytelling and following these 2 POVs was a fascinating creative choice, and one that worked really well because Dumrell had set these characters up so well. By switching up focus and focusing on these once side characters, now having center stage and basically going out and doing these adventures and separate things, it really broadened the world in book 3. So for book 1 and 2, a lot of political intrigue. We're dealing with kingdoms and castles and kings that are all sort of fighting each other, and it's very much limited to those particular areas even when we were traveling, and this book really brought the world to life, which was excellent for me as a world-building driven reader, as I'm sure you've heard me say 1,000 times before, and I will not stop saying it, so sorry, not sorry. So many elements of this book hit the mark for me. This is a wonderful book and a wonderful conclusion to this series. I'm going to start with characters, which is something that I don't praise very often. Somehow, Dumrell has made me care about each and every one of these characters as the books have progressed. And reading book 3, the foreshadowing in the first 2 books was excellent to bring these new characters to the forefront of the story. Each of these characters meant something to me. When things happened to them, I felt it, and that is just something that a lot of authors don't do for me, because it's not something that I necessarily look for in my books. So it was a nice experience to have while reading this 3rd installment of The Pillars of Peace. The second thing I want to note is just how good Tom Dumrell's pacing is. He knows when to make a scene fast. He knows when we need that next thing to happen, and it is very fast paced. But in book 3, I really felt that he excelled in pulling back and letting the reader experience some of those slower moments as well, but not in a way where it was overdrawn and boring, just in a way that we got to take a breath and say, oh, this is happening, and it would go back into a fast-paced book. This series as a whole, very, very fast-paced, but this book in particular really sort of drew on when that pace needed to be quickened and when it needed to slow down, and I thought it was done very, very well. The last thing I'm going to mention is the prose, and I think we do have to thank Tom's lovely wife at Be Your Editor, and I'll put her editing Instagram page down below if you're interested in just how good this prose is. Now, Tom himself put up a post saying that his wife said that he wasn't funny and some of his humour missed the mark. And through the editing process, I have to say that the humour in this book really did hit that mark. It was subtle, it was delightful, and it sort of gave you a smile in some of those more tense moments, but the prose was snappy. So for a fast-paced book and those fast-paced scenes, we had quick sentences, quick chapters, and really helped the book move along. The one thing I will say is that although this book is marketed as historical fantasy, it very much feels like historical fiction to me, with some of those elements brought in from other fantastical authors without having fantastical elements themselves in this book. So just go in knowing that you're not going to see epic dragon battles or anything like that. It is a very historical fiction feeling tale. That being said, I had a wonderful time with this series. I am glad that I bumped some of the other series that I thought I wanted to read in 2022 off the list to experience this one. Very quick, very enjoyable. I highly recommend this to anyone who likes those sorts of stories. That's it from me. That is the Palom and Where Heroes Were Born book reviews. If you like the content, give it one of those. If you want to see more of it, then click subscribe at your will, and I'll catch you in the next video. Ciao.